Says I am streaming live. My phone just said it was 6 o'clock, so have at it, Dave.
All right, it's 6 p.m. We'll call this regular village board meeting to order. Pursuant to Public Act 101-0640, the ongoing statewide disaster declarations meeting is being held remotely. You all please join me in a moment of silence. And also the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Liberty and justice for all. Sounds like a baseball stadium.
Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Trustee Mann. Trustee Gerger.
Here.
Trustee Charo.
Present.
Trustee Detmer.
Here.
Here.
Trustee Churchill.
Here.
Village President Kimsey.
Present. Are there any public announcements sent today?
No.
Public comments, email public comments, or any public comments from the room?
I had one public comment. It came in after the deadline, but he said last week the attorney was going to look into the breach of contract with the South Sangamon, and they wondered if he had any follow-up of that.
Who made that comment?
That was from Bonnie Billick.
So the reference that was used in response to that question was the Holland and Knight response that we previously paid for on what the breaches were, and the documents that were requested were available both through the commission's website and through our website. It covered all of that. Any further comments?
Do you have any?
I didn't really understand what you said.
Essentially, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the question was, is the Water Commission currently in a breach? And the references that we have currently states that no, they are not. That's the short summary there.
Okay. All right.
Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Trustee Gerger, could I have a motion, please, to bring the consent agenda forward? And Trustee Charo, can I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion regarding the warrants or the minutes from June 9th?
I have a question just about the truck bed. What happened to change truck bed that needed to be replaced?
It didn't need to be replaced. He wanted to replace it with a different type of truck bed that was more efficient to the work that those guys are doing now. The old truck bed was essentially you threw stuff in the back of it and it acted like a giant toolbox. This one has different attachments on it to be able to lift things and move things around and set it down, pick up a transformer off the back of it, move it over to the ground and set it down with a little crane.
Okay, thank you for the explanation.
Mm-hmm.
And then I see National Tree Cares on there in different sections. Does that total between all the sections about $44,040? And that's a combination of, I'm assuming, that the dump site, the normal branch pickup, monthly pickup, and then it looked like for what the cert for the zones for that clearing paths along.
There was the normal bill. There was the bill for cleaning up the dump site, and then there was 2 bills for trees that needed to be trimmed or cut down, actually, that were in power lines right after a storm.
Anyone else? All right, Madam Clerk, could you take a roll?
Trustee Gerber?
Yes.
Trustee Charo?
Yes.
Trustee Detmers?
Yes. Yes.
Trustee Mao?
Yes.
Trustee Churchill?
Yes.
No old business. Under new business, we have an ordinance prohibiting the use of groundwater as potable water supply by the installation or use of potable water supply wells or by any other method. Trustee Mao, could I have a motion to bring this to the floor?
I'll make that motion.
Trustee Detmers, could I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Greg, are you prepared to explain this? Essentially, this is an update to an ordinance we passed in 2019 that had a few modifications requested by the EPA.
Right. So I don't know if you all remember, but back in 2019, we worked on this particular ordinance. That area has some, the area, if you look on the exhibits, has a shallow groundwater table. And what this ordinance does is it prohibits using groundwater as potable water for the area that's designated. So we passed this in 2019, and the IEPA requested essentially 4 changes to the ordinance that we passed. So the first is that the language was added, and this is in section 2 of the ordinance. The language was added that says this prohibition was expressed there. This prohibition expressly applies to the village of Chatham. That makes the village liable as well for any, or it prohibits the village from using groundwater there as potable water. The next 2 changes that occurred are in the exhibits. If you look at the Exhibit A that was included in your packet today, you'll see it's a much more detailed map than the exhibit that was provided previously. It's broken out by parcels. Yeah, Paul?
There's no exhibit A or B.
We don't have any attachments.
There's no, those pages are blank.
Let me send those then. And those aren't up on board docs.
I
Either.
put up last year, or the last map. Has the map changed?
Oh yeah. The exhibits are different in this one.
Okay.
Let me circulate it around real quick.
Can you put it on your screen, Greg?
I probably can. Let me.
Yeah, you'll have to get control there.
Pat, if I forward you an email, can you put it on your screen? I'm between the iPad, my camera, and
That's
my
fine.
computers here off to the side, so it'd just be a mess for me to try to do it. Pat, I just resent Exhibit A and B. It's the ones that Exhibit A and B were proposed by or shared with us by CWM Company, who's been working on this regarding the ordinance. So I can give you a description if while Pat tries to bring it up. The Exhibit A is essentially it's the same area location. It's much better. It's marked it's outlined in blue, and the parcels are actually identified, so it looks much more like a GIS overhead picture of the area, and with the groundwater platted out, as opposed to the old Exhibit A, which was attached to the prior ordinance, which is much less detailed. It's just kind of an overview of the area. And then Exhibit B is just the parcel identification numbers of every parcel that is impacted by this ordinance. So there's no change. This ordinance actually doesn't change anything that we passed in the prior ordinance. All of these parcels were included in our prior ordinance. It just clarifies it to IEPA's level of detail that they want.
Greg, have all those parcels, the owners of those parcels, been notified?
They would have been notified with in 2019. I believe that they were all notified. I'd have to go back and check, but that's when this whole project was underway, and this ban doesn't ban anything beyond what we did in 2019. We're not changing anything substantive, with the exception of what I will ask you to do with the fourth change, but we haven't gotten there yet. All of these parcels have been prohibited from using groundwater as potable water. The reason we're doing it this way is because if we didn't do it via one large ordinance in each one of these parcels, they would still be prohibited by IEPA from using this as potable water, but they would each of them would have to go to. It's my understanding each of them would have to go to IEPA and verify that this land use was, or that the land was not being used for potable water.
The other thing is the village, if you are inside the village limits, you're required to purchase potable water from the village, and you can't have a well. So it doesn't really affect any of the value of any of those properties, at least in my opinion.
So to summarize there on the first 3 points, all it is further detail to what was previously passed in 2019.
That's correct. And as requested by IEPA. Now the fourth one, when we passed our ordinance back in 2019, we had the exact language that this one has, that this ordinance has verbatim, which is any person violating the provisions of this ordinance shall be subject to a fine of not less than blank or more than blank. In 2019, we did not insert fine amounts. The feedback that we got was these have been, IEPA noted that we didn't pass fine amounts. CWM company has noted that some ordinances have been approved that had blanks in these amounts, but I'm recommending that we put in a fine schedule so we're not back and amending if IEPA changes their guidance and wants us to actually finalize the fine amount.
So just to add that, the signed copy that we had of this ordinance did indicate 250, a fine not less than 250 or more than 500 for each violation. That's the copy, the signed copy that we have on the village website.
So I don't know that they ever got that version. It looks like in what I looked, it looks like they got a copy of one that had blanks in it that were not filled out. So I don't know when.
My recommendation would be to have someone offer an amendment at this point in time to fill in those blanks with what we had included in 19, so we can send an IEPA correct copy that has those things, just to stay on track that we're not changing anything with this, we're just clarifying.
We amend this ordinance to read a fine not less than $250 or more than $500 for each violation.
Trustee Scherschel, will you second that?
I'll second.
Okay, do we have any further discussion regarding the amendment, the fine amounts to match what we had done prior?
I could also offer to table this so that we could have the math and the parcels listed to the next meeting, and with that amended language included for the next board meeting.
The option is there. Pat can move the map up.
What's that?
As the attorney mentioned, the map is just a detail of previously included.
Hold on, I'll put the map back up again.
Can you share that to the WebEx screen, Pat? Would be the easiest way for everybody to see it all.
Yes. Go.
It's difficult for us to look at things if they're not in the exhibits, so going forward, if we could include them, I would appreciate it.
All right. Can you guys see that?
No, you have to put it on your WebEx screen, not the.
Oh.
All right, now you should all be able to look at the map that's provided.
So the center of the map is on the BP station at the corner of Walnut and Route 4.
Yeah, this is different than what we looked at in 2019, but.
Well, you see the round circle in the middle there, Dewey, with the hatch marks? That was what you saw before, and they asked them to be more specific.
Yeah, what we saw before was the circle in the middle and the blue rectangle, a blue square between it, or around it. So obviously it's different if this is in the square, but it seems to be pretty much the same area, obviously.
How are all those parcels notified of this? Was it by letter?
Because I'm guessing they weren't, because we don't allow them to have the well currently, so this wasn't really a change to them. Is that?
That's correct.
Okay, does anybody need anything further here? So we have on the table, we currently have an amendment on the table to delineate the fine amounts of not less than 250 or more than 500. Madam, would you take a roll, please?
Trustee Berger.
Yes.
Trustee Carl.
Brett, did you say yes?
Yes, sir.
Carl.
Amy, you're breaking up.
Yes. Sorry, I had it muted.
Trustee Detmers.
Yes.
Trustee Mao.
Yes.
Trustee Churchill.
Yes.
Okay, and now a roll call on the ordinance as amended.
Trustee Berger.
I'm going to abstain.
Trustee Charo.
Yes.
Trustee Detmers.
Yes, given that it's not a lot different and the village already disallowed for wells.
Sorry, Dave, what did you say?
I was just saying that I will vote yes to accept this ordinance, but only because the village already didn't allow folks to
Trustee Mao,
Yes.
Trustee Churchill,
Present.
Madam Clerk, you mark me as a yes.
yes. Trustee, so Village President Kimsey, I have you as a yes.
Yes. Moving on to item 2 is the further presentation of our appropriations for the corporate purposes of fiscal year commencing on the first day of May 2020, ending on the 30th day of April 2021. So I'll turn this over to Sherry and Pat.
2, 3, 4.
Right. Okay, I hope everybody can see the presentation on the screen, but this is our fiscal year 2021 proposed budget, and this is our PowerPoint presentation like we've done in the past years. So the second slide shows you what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the fund structure, the budget process, budget goals, items in the budget document, and then just a fiscal year 2021 proposed budget overview. So now we want to move on to the third slide, fund structure. The village's financial transactions are reported in individual funds, and although we have several different types of funds, we're going to focus on 3 major funds, which is the general fund and our 2 proprietary funds, the electric and water and sewer fund. But what is also included in our total budget is also our special revenue funds, capital projects fund, the cemetery permanent fund, and the pension trust fund. But those are smaller funds. This presentation mainly focuses on our 3 major funds. So the next slide shows our budget process. We talked about this a little bit last time. In February, we started with revenue and preliminary payroll estimates. And into March, we started reviewing these preliminary results with our village manager, and then commenced with doing meetings with the village management team. And then mid-March, our budget work was put on hold due to COVID-19 pandemic. We just needed some time to evaluate where our revenue estimates were going to be at before we wanted to proceed with any more work on the budget. And for the month of May, we revised our revenue estimates and looked at cutting expenses from the budget. Mainly, most of our general fund cuts were due to deciding not to fill vacant positions. Then on June 9th, we did a budget status update, and we started working on the preliminary budget document. And tonight we have our presentation, and hopefully on July 14th, we will conduct a public hearing and then actually pass the 2021 appropriation ordinance. The next slide shows our budget goals. These haven't changed in the past 2 years, but the goals for the village are focus on customer service, efficient performance, economic development, and quality of life. And we try to have department goals that match these village goals, and how the budget is put together. So some items that are in the budget document, that is, we've got a very rough draft that will be available to view shortly. We've got estimated changes in fund balance and net position, position summary schedule showing the funded positions in the budget, plus what was funded in the past 2 budgets. A whole section on our debt service obligations, some graphs with tables with show the budget summary, and we've added a glossary that has some definitions of terms that are found throughout the budget document. So the next slide goes on to the proposed budget overview. So this budget we have presented currently is at $26,378,914. That includes all of the funds, with the general fund being at just under 5.7 million, and the electric fund at just over 11 million, and the water and sewer fund just over almost 7.5 million. Continuing on with the budget overview, we like to show our actual revenue versus our actual expenditures, because just in past years, our budgeted expenditures are more than our budgeted revenues. That's because we carry forward items from previous fiscal years. We always carry forward a large liability of accrued time on the books for our employees, time that is accrued over many years, but could, at any point in this fiscal year, we could be required to pay that out. So as you can see, starting from the left and going to the right, you'll see historical numbers for 2019, 2020. Basically, our operating revenues cover our operating expenditures. And we're even looking at that for this new fiscal year 2021 proposed budget. But this budget does include capital expenditures and special projects, for which we'll pay with cash on hand, accrued time payouts. And then we have some carry forward of some items that would be paid with prior debt issuance. So now moving on to focusing on our three major funds: the general fund, the electric fund, and the water and sewer fund. This is screen right here is a pie chart of the general revenue fund revenues. Total estimated revenues are at $5,166,470. The fund's main revenue sources are property tax, sales tax, and income tax. And these sources represent 65% of the general fund revenue. Now, the state shared revenues were updated using the latest IML projections, and those have been amended, and they reflect the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in addition to this, the village is also estimating about a 15% decline in sales tax revenues, which is just based on what we've seen other communities doing. I think the IML made a statement about it, and just by looking at where our sources of our sales tax revenue come from. The next slide is a breakdown of our expenditures by department and expenditures by type. And like in past, the bulk of the general fund expenditures are personnel related at 78%, pretty much. The next highest category are for professional services. And as far as department goes, the department with the most personnel is our police, so they get the majority of the general fund budget. Okay. So the total appropriation of the general fund for fiscal year 2021 is greater than the estimated revenues. And we talked about this before, and it's greater by $506,000. And these are a list of the items that are going to be, if actually incurred, would be paid out with cash on hand. We've got a transfer of funds from a subdivision settlement to the capital projects fund to complete work on sidewalks. We have the estimated liability for accrued benefits that we previously spoke about. We're carrying forward some funds to do park development, which we've done each year. We've designated some. The police department has some restricted cash accounts that are required. to be only spent on police type expenditures. So those are paid out from the cash accumulated in those accounts. And then after we did our budget revisions, reviewing the revenues for the COVID-19, we actually ended up with a budget deficit of $46,566. So moving on to the general fund cash balances. This shows a 5-year history of where our cash is. It's estimated at our fiscal year end, April 30th, 2020. We had over $2 million in unrestricted cash. This falls within the village's guidelines of having 2 to 3 months of cash on hand. And that would equate usually to a range of about $945,000 to $1,418,000. So that's where we want to fall within this range. So that being said, if we spend every dollar that is appropriated, our cash balance would drop to about $1.5 million. So it would still fall over, just slightly over that 3-month target.
But the thing that you need to remember is that means everybody that has vacation time and sick time and everything else cashes all of that in, which has never happened. The only part that right now we're showing that would be over would be roughly $45,000. Now, it's going to be more than 40 because some people will cash some stuff in. But 45,000 is where it's sitting with a max of getting to $1.5 million, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's if all PTO was cashed in, Pat?
Yes. It would still be at $1.5 million.
And that's 3 months cash on hand?
It's over 3 months cash. I think it was
3 and a quarter? 3 and a quarter?
3 and a quarter.
That's what I read, yeah.
Next page.
Okay, we're going to go on to some highlights in the different departments. The administration department is going to finally complete the comprehensive plan, I believe.
Well, we hope so. We're well into, I think, year 2 of the comprehensive plan, but we've never tried to do a comprehensive plan in the middle of a pandemic. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt on that.
Well, just follow up on that. The Second County Regional Planning Commission, they intend that we can meet with our group next month at the regularly scheduled meeting. So we're looking at a draft at that point in time. So the public comment periods, that's the stuff that starts to be tricky with how to do this because there's public inspection, public comment periods that go along with passing this. So working through the details of how to do that in a pandemic, like Pat said, we'll get there.
But it does seem like it's taken a long time. But
okay, in the administration, continue with the process of annexations. We have actually completed the utility office customer service manual, and we've talked about developing service manuals for other departments. I guess continue exploring options for some of our capital projects considered, and we also talked about actively working on a succession plan by hiring an additional accountant, which that was added since the last meeting. And then moving on to the Parks Department, we mentioned before the park development costs. We did scale back the recreation program this year. There was only a brochure produced advertising area programs, so their budget's down a bit. In the street department, we're going to continue to utilize staff to complete patching of streets and repairing sidewalks. Also scheduled for the end of the fiscal year 2021, if their budgets are come within line of targets, as far as their funding in the utility tax fund and the general fund, the street department would like to purchase a truck from the Chatham Township. And then the police department has restricted cash purchases, maintaining the department's current staffing level, and that's it for the general fund departments. Now we have the electric fund revenues, and their revenues are just under 11 million. The majority of that come from electric sales, 92%. We have 6,000 electric customers which we serve, and our projected revenue also includes the repayment of interfund loan. This is the third year of the repayment plan between the money that the water fund owes the electric fund. And then moving on to the electric expenses, as you can see, the majority of the electric fund expenses are for electric purchases from our electric service provider. They make up 63%. The next highest category is personnel expense, which is at 14%. These have been estimated based on rates of pay established in existing ordinances. In addition, we actually do have about just under a 12% increase included for health insurance costs, but this rate is good for 2 years, so we're seeing the cost. And this year, next year, we will not have any increase in health insurance costs.
Sherry, I have a question. What did that interfund loan amount start at? Do you know?
About $358,000.
It's down to 89, is that what I read?
No, 89 is the annual payment. Right now it's just under 190,000.
Okay.
89 this year, 89 next year, and then they'll be done.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear couldn't understand what he was asking about, what line item.
The interfund loan that happened, I forget how many years ago. It's been quite a while that the water department borrowed money from the electric fund. We and Sherry all thought that we need to pay that back to make sure that the electric fund money, or the money that goes in to pay for your electric bills, stays with electric items. We made it a commitment 4 years ago to pay that back over a 4-year period. This will be year 3 of that 4-year period. There'll be 1 more year after that of roughly $89,000 a year coming from the water fund into the electric fund to make them whole.
And I would hope moving forward, our hope is to not do this borrowing again, right? This interfund loan.
Well,
Yeah, that loan was made in fiscal year 2015.
Oh, I know, I was here when it happened.
Yeah, that's what somebody asked that question on when it was made. The original amount, 358, 828. Sherry's got that later in the water section on here.
Are we ready to keep going?
Sure.
Okay, so we'll look at the cash balances in the electric fund. And right now at April 30th, 2020, they had just over $3.2 million in unrestricted cash. And they are a little over their target range of 1.9 to 2.8 million. The electric fund's fiscal year 2021 proposed budget includes utilization of unrestricted cash to cover accrued time to employees and about $70,000 of items that are carried forward from the fiscal year 2020 budget. So even if all, and after that there was also a budget deficit of $94,000. But even if all those items were paid with cash on hand, the electric fund cash balance would reduce down to about 2.9 million. Still within, actually slightly over the 3-month target. for our cash requirements.
In this past year, or just recently, the electric department has moved the overhead power in Willow Glen underground with the hopes that that will cease a lot of the power outages that we have in those areas. The residents, we run the new underground line in the easements behind the homes. Most of those homes have been fed from a pole to the roof of their house. They will have to pay for that upgrade if they want to change. If they don't want to change, then the only risk that they have really of a power outage is if a branch that's in their yard falls on the line that's coming across their property. And we plan on doing that in more areas. We had quite a few outages when this last storm came through. Most of those in the areas of Glenwood and Cottonwood and stuff like that. Another area where we have a lot of overhead lines. You guys voted a couple weeks ago to pay for having a line run from the substation on Route 4 at Independence, north up to Mansion Road, and then west over to be able to tie into Cardinal Ridge, which would put a second loop on pretty much all of the subdivisions that we have out in the northwest corner. Currently, we only have one feed that comes in from that way, and that runs in through all of the streets and up and down Ptarmigan, and feeds through the neighborhoods that way and then works its way over into North Point and Cardinal Ridge. This will loop everything, and in that way, if you do happen to have an outage coming from the south, they can be backfed in from the north. So,
Is there a plan in that neighborhood the Willow Glen neighborhood, to put the line that runs between the two subdivisions underground also, or is there no plan to do that?
no, I think the plan is to get all of our main distribution lines underground and then go from there. But we haven't had an outage in a neighborhood where the lines are underground in, I think, 3 or 4 years. I think Shane told me this morning. So,
Because in the long run, that saves the village money by having it on the ground, then because you don't have the limbs down, you don't have.
correct.
We've had several flickers of electric
Yeah.
this past week, actually.
If an area goes out, it'll flicker for a second and then usually pop right back on. That's getting back fed. If it goes out and stays out, then usually what has happened is a transformer has blown, lightning hit it, a tree shorted it out, an animal crawled up there and shorted it out. Those are the areas that we're working to eliminate. And slowly but surely, we're getting there. So.
All right. Moving forward with the electric fund budget highlights. The electric fund budget was revised for some effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. It was prepared basically assuming that we would begin assessing penalties and resuming collection procedures by August 1st. And if we're unable to do those actions, then we look at probably about a $30,000 reduction per quarter in penalty income, as well as additional probably bad debt write-offs. The electric fund is carrying forward a capital lease purchase from 2020 of a new line truck. The purchase price is estimated at $259,751. The budget includes maintaining the department's transmission and distribution personnel at the current staffing level. Filling existing vacancies would be put on hold due to the revisions.
I have a question about that part. What is what the current longevity of the electric department staffing is? I mean, do we have any people that are close to retiring, or are they all within that 5-year and up?
I think we have 2 that will 2 to 3 that might possibly retire before 5 years, yeah.
So but none within the next fiscal year that you
No,
anticipate, okay.
not in the electric department.
Let's see, they're also carrying forward a purchase of a new vehicle, which was approved by resolution earlier this calendar year for a truck in the amount of about $30,000. And then the truck bed that you just voted on tonight was actually a purchase from that carried forward from last fiscal year. We're going to complete the warning siren project, part of which is paid for from a grant from DCO. And then they're going to begin work on the Mansion Road project, which is to install underground 3-phase line running down Route 4 and then west on Mansion to Cardinal Ridge. This creates a loop in the system servicing the northwest end of the village. And the project is estimated at a cost of $349,000.
I have to say those tornado sirens or those warning sirens, you can hear them real well from South Gordon Drive. We were working outside, just heard them all go off and sounded great.
They've been completely installed, inspected, added into the system, so that's project complete. This month, we will fill out the last report to the state that all items have been taken care of, and then we'll fill out the paperwork to request the reimbursement.
So we're not going to do a two test, are we? Last time they tested them, or a couple times ago, they shot them off twice. So I didn't know if that's something that's going to be.
No, I guess not.
No, they're not going to do it again.
Just one time. The reason why is because one of the sirens that was needed to be disconnected was not disconnected. To relocate that siren, so we'll make sure it had the coverage for the new siren, make sure it's covered.
We're going to take 2 of the smaller sirens that we replaced and move them to south and east to areas that don't have siren coverage to be able to help those out.
Moving on to the Water and Sewer Fund, the revenue of the fund, $7,234,875. The Water Department has approximately 6,000 water customers and about 5,750 sewer customers. The revenue includes a sewer rate increase that was passed along with the fiscal year 2020 increase. We did, I think, a 3-year, multi-year rate increase. We were just passing along a rate increase from the village's sanitary sewer supplier. The rate increase amounted to 16 cents to the monthly facility charge and about 18 cents per 1,000 gallons of sewer usage. Water and sewer sales make up the majority of the fund's revenue at 97%. In water and sewer fund expenditures, the largest category is our water and sewer purchases, which represent about 64% of total costs. Personnel makes up the next highest at 16%. As you can see, there's the distribution of the expenditures. And the expenditures totaled $7,375,492. And the status of the unrestricted cash balance in the water and sewer fund was $1,367,439. It falls within the range, the target range of 2 to 3 months, which is actually $1,229,000 to $1,843,000. This budget includes the utilization of unrestricted cash on hand for estimated liability payouts in the amount of $115,000, It also includes the loan payment to the electric fund for 89,707. If all the items identified as being paid with cash on hand would reduce the balances to about 1,226,000. So it's going to fall just slightly below the 2-month target. But if that is very unlikely that would occur, since I don't believe we'll be paying out everybody's accrued time. But if it would, the village would make every effort to bring that balance back up in as short a time as possible.
Sherry, I'm curious, do you, and you may not have it tonight, and that's fine, but just based on last year and the trends, how are we on, the water revenues? Are we seeing an upward trend or level, or?
As far as the,
This past week, 2 weeks, we've had an upward trend on water sales because of the drought that was going on. I know water.
As a comparison to last year.
I think this year, right now, that 2-week drought period probably caused more water usage than a 2-week period last year. We didn't have that longest stretches of 2 weeks of nothing. So.
I think fiscal year 19, utility revenues were up. There was more usage in both electric and water.
Yeah.
When I was preparing the 2021 numbers, fiscal year 2020 was down actually for usage. We look at not just the previous year, we look at the past 5 to see what kind of trends. Some budget highlights for the water and sewer fund. Like the electric fund, the water fund's budget is.
Jerry, before you go on to the next slide.
Yes?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so back there at the end, I just had a question. So at the end, when you were talking about if all the funds were spent, you would be slightly below that 2-month cash on hand.
Yeah, about $3,000 below.
Say what?
It would only be about $3,000 below. You spent everything.
Okay. Do we have a policy and ordinance that requires us to budget to have 2 months cash on hand, or?
Yeah, it actually is in our financial policies within our budget document. But it also is included. To use that cash on hand, you are required to use it on unusual expenditures, like capital projects, like disasters, just like expenses, like the COVID-19 pandemic, how it affected it. We had a drop in income. So even though we might slightly fall below, the reasons for this, we're incurring this type of budget is because our penalty income and our bad debt expense is higher than we usually anticipate. So it would be fine to go ahead and dip into that if that was absolutely necessary.
If you look at the numbers too, Paul, the water fund is not projected to go into deficit this year. The electric and the general was, but the water was going to show that it was still in the positive. So if you did take into consideration that, most likely last year, if we would have spent all the money that was cash on hand, we probably would have dropped below that 2-month period last year too, wouldn't we have?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's not something out of the ordinary. The thing that's out of the ordinary is go back and look at 2016 when we started changing our policy here. We started actually having cash on hand. That's the big change, is that you actually have something to have cash on hand, where before we had $268,000.
Right. Which is not 2 months cash on hand.
It is not.
And another question I would have, so demand's been up the last 2 weeks. How much of that have we been on Springfield Water?
We have been on Springfield Water since, Saturday it will be 2 weeks.
So does that affect us, or do it has no effect at all?
It does not affect our bottom line at all. We pay the city of Springfield the same amount for the water that we would for the South Sangamon. The one thing that we do pay to the city of Springfield is a monthly charge of around, it's a little more than $500 to be able to have access to that water at any time that we need it. And that was voted on 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and we keep that contract going forward. Okay?
Thank you.
Yep. Next slide.
Yep. Okay. Moving on to the highlights. As I was saying, the water and sewer fund budget was prepared, was adjusted due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We reduced our penalties revenue, and we increased the amount for bad debt write-offs. This budget's been prepared assuming that we're going to begin collection procedures again in August. But if we were not to do that, you'd look at about a $20,000 reduction in penalty revenue, and there would be also probably additional bad debt write-offs. The budget, as we also discussed, includes passing along rate increases from the Sangamon County Water Reclamation District. Something that the Water Department has requested be put in the budget and is included is a $50,000 for a 1-ton truck. This is contingent on the department meeting their revenue and expense targets, and the purchase would be planned then for the fourth quarter of fiscal year 2021. And then this is a third year payments of the 4-year payment plan. The annual payment amount is $89,707. So that concludes our 3 major funds, but I do have some highlights from our other funds. Our capital projects fund only has one project right now, and that's just to utilize the settlement proceeds for sidewalk work. Yard waste recycling and refuse fund. The budget includes 80% of the salary of one of the street department employees to perform street sweeping throughout the year. We're going to continue the yard waste contracts of contracting out leaf pickup and branch pickup, and also includes year 2 of the 5-year lease purchase agreement for this street sweeper. Something new in the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund is a plan to actually spend down the dollars that have accumulated in that fund that are committed for cemetery care. The amounts projected about $79,000, and they'd like to use that to upgrade the road in the cemetery. And since most of the lot sales in the cemetery, or all the lot sales at this point in time, the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund just go into a trust, the principal is left intact. It really doesn't accumulate enough funds to actually produce interest to care for the cemetery. So staff has considered allocating 80% of the funds on lot sales to be able to use for cemetery care, but in hopes to build up funds to construct a mausoleum for cremations.
I'm very happy to see this because as I had talked with Pat, it's in dire need of work. So
The road.
yeah. The road, and good to see that that's being done. And as far as the mausoleum goes, is there an idea of where we would like to see that, or is that just
The area that we have not opened up is the farthest north point of the newer cemetery, which is on the north side of Walnut Street. If we upgrade the road a little bit and add additional parking, we could set aside a good portion of that north point part to put the mausoleum up there. And from what I hear, That seems to be where most people are moving towards instead of the full burial and the casket. A lot of them are looking for for cremation type areas, and it makes more sense to build those up instead of taking up ground space that we could use for people that want to actually have a casket in the grave.
Have we looked at a projected cost of that, or we're just putting money in the account?
Paula Staub had given me an estimate of something maybe 2 years ago. So we would have to get with the mausoleum company and then turn around and see what they could do for what kind of price. And then also give us an idea of what we should charge for it too.
Yeah.
So putting 80% of the revenues aside for this, how long are we expecting that we would need to save up to cover the cost that was quoted 2 years ago? Because I mean, this 80% came out of somewhere. Somebody must have had to do a calculation there to why not 75 or why not 90?
Haven't really looked at that yet. But we weren't allowing anything before.
Sorry, you weren't allowing anything for what?
To be able to use the funds that have accumulated there to do any, like putting in a mausoleum or anything like that.
The problem is.
We were saying the funds that we've accumulated we're going to use to fix the road, which makes sense, but that future revenues on lot sales would be allocated 80% to the mausoleum.
What was the percentage that gave us the 80,000? Is that?
There wasn't, the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund is a trust. 100% of the lot sales are considered the principal. They're invested, they have to be left intact. That $78,000 has built up as investment income since they started this trust. We cannot touch that principal. It's around, it's under $400,000 is maybe 380,000, I think, is in there. We can't touch that. That is just left there. It's always, you're just going to be able to use the interest earned off of it. But since it doesn't produce that much in interest income to care for or do anything with that investment income, so it built up over the years, and we probably got about $78,000. So going forward, if you're ever going to want to do something with the cemetery money, you're going to have to take that $400 in lot sales and allocate part of it to go for care and not to go into the trust principal. I don't know, maybe Greg can explain it a little better. He's the one that explained it to us when we asked about doing the cemetery project.
Sure. So the Cemetery Care Act, what it specifies is any money that you put into your care fund can never be touched again. So you can only take the interest from that and use it. And once that care fund gets to above $500,000, I believe is the threshold now, we actually have to transfer the trustee. We can no longer act as the trustee. So right now, what I believe, Sherry, correct me if I'm wrong, but right now all of the plot sale money goes into the care fund.
Yes.
And we want to change that. So the CARE Act says a minimum of 15% needs to go into the care fund, but then the other maximum of 85% can go into a separate fund that's not labeled your care fund, but can be a cemetery fund that can go towards expenditures that you would like to make for the cemetery. So right now, by putting that amount of money into the care fund, the village is actually restricting the improvements it can do at its cemetery.
We charge $400. We charge $400 for a grave now. We would like to be able to set aside 320 of it for each sale to start the plans for putting together this mausoleum, or if we have to go out and purchase additional land somewhere in the future, if we use up what we currently have, we don't have any money to be able to go buy another plat for the cemetery. So 320 of that 400 would go so that we could use it to either put up a mausoleum or purchase additional land. $80 of that 400 would then go into the perpetual fund, meeting the requirement of at least 15% by that. And then if we do that 80%, as we increase the price of graves in the future, it'll still be based off of 80% of whatever the price of a grave is. Unfortunately, if you take a look at the graves over in the cemetery on the south side of Walnut Street, most of those sold for $25. And that's kind of the predicament that we're in. We sold an awful lot of graves for a very cheap price. Motor fuel tax?
Okay, motor fuel tax fund. The amount appropriated for the regular program is $309,192. Includes winter maintenance, drainage, sidewalks, curbs, patching, roadside maintenance. We also we have received an amount from the State of Illinois Rebuild Illinois program. It is required to be deposited into our MFT account, but it needs to be spent separately on a separate project. So at this point in time, we don't have a project outlined. There is a line item in the MFT funds budget for a Rebuild Illinois program if something is developed during the fiscal year.
Do we have an idea? Do we know that amount? Or can we say what that amount is?
Oh, already we've received $126,000.
So we could receive more from that same program?
I believe so. I think it's a multi-year program. I don't know if we'll receive any more this year or not, but I think there will be some more at least next year as well.
So are those?
I believe there's supposed to be 5 more payments of the equivalent amount made.
I haven't seen any information on that. All of a sudden, we received that deposit in May in our bank account, so I had to go find out what it was. But I haven't seen any literature about the disbursement and how much.
So those are shovel-ready projects.
And like I said, I believe there's 5 more equivalent terms on it, because I think we get up to $700-some thousand that we were allocated out of that.
Okay.
Additionally, there's up to $550,000 more dollars that's in the state budget that has now been funded, that we haven't included here yet, that would be towards infrastructure. DCEO hasn't put up a guidance yet on what form that project has to take, what it can be used for. So we're still kind of on a stay tuned on what project it can be used for and what the actual timing of any disbursements out of that would be.
And Sherry, with the yard waste program, is that balanced with the revenue we're getting in from the fees? Surplus, deficit?
Actually, it is on a deficit based on the lease costs, the contractual services, and then we also had employee costs. There's I'd have to look up that deficit number. I don't have it in front of me. But the fund had built up money in it over a period of time, and part of the thought, I think, was when we did the capital lease of the street sweeper that that would
help spend down some of that excess of funds that we had in there.
Okay. I had a few questions if I could. I noticed in the beginning there we talked about the future municipal complex and that there would be money being set aside for such a complex, like a savings fund. How much money is being set aside for that municipal complex?
I don't think, we've never really talked about setting money aside. What we were looking at doing is when we get our increase in population from our census, our general fund revenues would increase per capita, and that would allow us to borrow out for at least the admin police portion of the building, and then you'd probably borrow out for the water and electric side. So at this point, the only thing that we'd probably be doing is if we did any planning or engineering, that would just come out of our regular engineering budget.
I see. So we're continuing to explore options. Complex. Again, it's a little difficult to hear you sometimes, but what you're saying is that we would likely just hire some engineers to look at land that could be potentially used and then draw a building diagram, and those monies we would come out of our 2021 plan. Is that what we're saying?
You cut out a lot there, but what the plan would be is to, if we had a funding source, then the board would have to turn around and say, okay, where would you like to see a new village hall? And we would start looking into different areas, whether it's property that we currently own, whether it's different land, whether we would sell some of the stuff that we have, whether we would trade it. There's all those different options there. Whether we would go in partners with, whether it be somebody like the school district, even the private sector, with sharing a building with them. There's so many different options and there's so many different ways to go. But currently, the only funds that we have that we could use towards that is the cash on hand that we have in the general fund. We would most likely charge the electric and the water something because they would be taking part of that building. So you could turn around and come up with a formula to share the cost of that building across all of our funds. We're not there yet.
Yeah, Trustee Demers, so just to clarify what Pat said, the budget doesn't contemplate actually building one. This is more of a long-term planning aspect, continue to explore what the options would be there to see if anything made sense or anything presented itself that made sense to us.
Okay, cool. I was just clarifying. It was included in the budget document, so I wasn't sure if there was implied.
In the larger document, when you get to the almost 200 some pages that goes in there, part of it addresses long-term capital planning. These are items you see, more in their future outlook kind of things.
Okay.
An example.
And that was actually my second question. Are we still getting that larger document showing, and will that show like line by line comparisons of charge accounts compared to the year prior? So in other words, like,
are they still getting
sewer revenues are projected to be up 10%, or those types of comparisons that are interesting to me. It doesn't included in this review that we have here.
I don't know when you want to send that.
Yeah, so similar to what we talked about at the latest meeting when we covered this, due to the timing and due to the wrench that the pandemic threw into the budget process, we're kind of running in parallel. So Cher's slightly ahead with giving this presentation at the same time while that larger document is being prepared and finalized. So that the budget document will still come out. We've got 3 weeks now between this meeting and our next meeting because of the way the calendar falls.
2 weeks?
Okay.
So we're just trying to keep things running timeline-wise to be able to get to a spot where we have our appropriation passed.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was just reading that. It sounds like we're going to be voting to approve this budget at our next meeting, and cool. Just glad we're on the same page.
I got today the draft from Sherry of that document, and I will forward it to all the trustees and the mayor. None of them have seen it yet. I'll send it out tomorrow, but it's in draft format, so look at it that way. But I think it's in pretty good shape, so.
Thank you.
And then, are you done doing? I don't want to.
Sorry, yes, those are my two items. Thanks.
And then back up to the general fund, the park development, the 30,000. Do we know specifically what that's for, or is that just being included in there?
You remember the Prairie Vista Park? We had 80,000. We used some of that money for the pickleball court. That's the remainder of that towards the Prairie Vista Park.
Okay.
All right, did anyone else have any questions for Sherry or commentary on the budget? I'll note one thing here. Sherry made reference to late charges and finance charges associated with utilities at a couple points in time. We have been following the spirit of the agreements that the Illinois Commerce Commission has been making with the for-profit utility companies. Even though not required to, the ICC does not control what we do. But we've been following that spirit because it made sense in what we're doing. On those terms, they've not come to an agreement stipulated with those utility companies that the moratoriums on disconnections and suspensions of late payment fees would end when Illinois enters phase 4.
Did Dave just freeze?
It's frozen Dave. Oh, he's gone. Finish his thoughts, Paul.
Right?
We're supposed to be in phase 4 Friday.
I think I can sort of hear Dave.
I think he's on by phone as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, did it come back? Sorry, guys. My office is having internet issues today.
No problem.
So I got cut off in there where I said the plan was the 30 days after the time that Illinois moved into phase 4, which as scheduled would be this Friday. So 30 days beyond that is when the ICC agreed with the for-profit utilities to move in that direction. So it's going to be our intention to move in that direction to the crew over in the utility office. Billings have been working through how they develop repayment plans and continue to work with those that have difficulty to see them through this and get all the balances caught up as people are getting their businesses back in line and returning to work. So.
And
does anyone have any questions there?
just not on that aspect, just to go back with following with Dewey's question and Pat, with the budget and the 200-page budget, if we needed to balance the budget, would it be apparent in there what your plan would be to need to take out in order to actually budget in areas where there would be a projected deficit?
Well, if you look at it, we're balancing the budget by using cash on hand. That's why over the last 4 years, we've been cutting so that we would be in a place where if something like this pandemic came along or a tornado or something, the village would be in a position to be able to make it through that. I think that's where we're at right now. We've turned around, we've looked at our budget, we've taken out all of the fluff. But in 2 of those funds, we need to spend a little bit more than what we currently are projecting will come in. Now, those numbers could go up, those numbers could go down. In the past, Sherry's been very conservative on the amount of income coming in. And if you look at those charts in the past, we usually have more income than what we spend. That's why I think we feel good about where we're at on all 3 of those major budget areas.
So Pat has hit kind of the philosophy we've had on the financial planning and on the budget. Every year, the revenue estimates that we use are very conservative revenue estimates, and then on the expense side, we get a lot more. I guess it's we estimate generally higher expenses than we actually incur, and that's to account for these things so that we know if things didn't come in as projected, if we were starting to look off at some point, do we have enough financial cushion that remains to be able to get through the year without having to cut services or run through furloughs, which is a situation you see a lot of communities are in where they're having that discussion. But then when you look at one of the earlier charts in there, Sherry had the view that showed what was originally budgeted versus what was actually spent. So the expenses were budgeted high and then actively managed, and they're generally significantly lower than what we put into the budget. And that's how we've been able to maintain those cash balances, increase those slots to where we have this rainy day fund that you can go through a pandemic like we have and experience some of the challenges that are prevalent across the state and the nation without missing much of a beat.
Yeah, if we hadn't been so conservative over the last 4 years, it'd be a completely different story. But we planned for a problem. The problem propped up. If you don't take advantage of what you had planned for, then it will be hard to convince department heads to tighten and scrimp their budgets down in the future. In this case, that's where they're at these days. There's usually one item that they need. The truck from the township, that's a once in a few years chance of purchasing. It would become our second newest snowplow. So if that truck becomes available to us, we'd like to purchase it. If that puts us having to dig into our cash on hand to be able to do that, I think that's a worthwhile purchase. That's why we sit and we have these budget meetings, is to try to figure out what is really needed and what is, well, I'd like to have it, but I can hold off till next year. The same thing is with the water department. They really, really could use a 1-ton truck to make their job more efficient. And actually, they're not in a deficit. And in the electric fund most likely, if it wasn't for the big project that they were probably doing along Route 4, they probably would not be in a budget deficit either. And they've had 2 big trucks that has been taken. They take over a year to come in. So when we go ahead and give them the okay to purchase that, and then it gets carried over, and then it gets carried over again, we've really tried to make it as tight as we could. But there is 1 or 2 items in each budget line item that those guys would like to purchase. And it's really hard to tell them that over the last 4 years, that they've really tightened their belt and saved up some money. Now we need to use just a little bit of it. Does that answer your question, Paul?
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, any additional questions for Sherry? So as the budget process goes, before we get to a spot where we pass our actual appropriation ordinance, and recall that the appropriation ordinance is summary numbers, not the individual details on it. That process requires a public hearing to be held prior to a vote, which obviously takes notification requirements for us. What I do need from you guys tonight is the indication, would you be ready to hold that public hearing and be ready for a vote at our next meeting, which is in 3 weeks, so that we can file the appropriate notifications to schedule that public hearing?
I need to see that 200-page document and see how many questions before I can answer that myself.
I'll get it to you tomorrow.
I'm in the same position.
Sherry, the notice is 10 days prior?
Yes, just 10 days. So we
Yeah, I
would
could-
need to have it published in the July 2nd Clarion.
So as we continue down our path here, you guys will see that draft arrive tomorrow. Sherry's giving it till July 2nd to make sure that you've gone through it, so that we can tell her whether to publish that notice or not.
Actually, I would need probably the beginning of that week to meet the publication deadline.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not sure if it
Right.
makes a difference you can hold the public hearing, but you don't necessarily have to pass the ordinance that night. That might be a question for Greg.
Well, you have to publish what the ordinance is going to look like. So if you have the public hearing based on the published ordinance, you're not going to change what you vote on. Correct, Greg?
That's right. So you don't have to have the public hearing and meeting back to back, but if you are publishing and having a public hearing, after that, if you're going to change it, then you're going to have to republish it. So you want to have that public hearing on the ordinance that you intend to pass.
So the long story short, is start reviewing the draft that you get right away tomorrow. I think the ad deadline is generally Tuesday. If we give Joe something by Tuesday, we can get into the Clarion in time. So, all right. Any additional questions there? Schedule a meeting for the Public Properties and Recreation Commission at 6 p.m. on July 13th. Village Board, July 14th at 6 p.m., followed by the Committee of the Whole. Planning Commission scheduled at July 16th at 6 p.m. The Village Board at 6 p.m. July 28th, and the Utility Oversight Subcommittee scheduled for 6 p.m. on August 10th. Was there any additional public comment?
Before you get to the public comment, I think Brett wanted to change that utility oversight to July 20.
Okay, we'll note that as July 20th then.
Thank you.
Okay, one thing, we touched briefly that Illinois was set to move into phase 4 as of Friday. In that, they have released their guidance on what meetings should look like and what the associated safety precautions should be taken. We're of the opinion that beginning with phase 4, that we can move our meetings back to in-person meetings at the Village Hall and follow the guidelines that have been put out for meeting spaces and gathering spaces, published by DCEO earlier this week. What that provides for is reduced capacity on meeting rooms down to 50%, which I think is 35 for our room, if I recall correctly, Pat.
That's correct.
So we'll be able to fit up to 35 into our meeting room. We'll actually have space seating out across the crowds. We do continue, as we have long before this started, to broadcast these through our live stream capabilities, and I would continue to encourage people to take advantage of the ability to view these on live stream. We will continue to provide that email address for submission of public comments prior to a meeting. And the other thing I want to note with this is with the changes to the workers' comp rules, any COVID-19 case contacted by an employee can be assumed to have occurred at their work environment. And so in order for us to avoid the financial implications that could be associated with that situation, we have to be able to show that we follow the guidance of the state that's issued through DCEO and through the Department of Public Health, as well as the best practices that are published by the Centers for Disease Control. So to that end, as we move back to in-person meetings, we're going to have to enforce a mask or face covering requirement for anybody that is participating on site or viewing the meeting inside the meeting room. So I want to be clear that we have to do that to continue to provide our financial cover as it may be associated with those workers' compensation cases. As we move back, we're going to continue to provide the avenues for those that cannot wear a mask or choose not to wear a mask to be able to participate remotely, view remotely, or submit public comments remotely. So I wanted to put that out to make sure everybody understood that and knew what our plan was going to be in moving back. I can see some nods and don't hear any comments, so I'm move to the fact that everybody understands that that's what our position needs to be to provide those protections. If everybody's got any questions regarding the unemployment issues that surround it, Greg knows those answers, I know those answers, and Brett, even though he's moved out of the labor world a little bit, is very well versed in what those mean as well. So having no further business tonight, no closed session scheduled for tonight, I will entertain a motion to adjourn from Trustee Scherschel.
I'll make that motion.
And a second from Trustee Charo.
I'll make that motion.
And Madam Clerk, we will need a roll call as well.
Trustee Gerger. Trustee Gerger. Trustee Charo.
Yes.
Trustee Detmer.
Yes.
Trustee Mao.
Left the meeting.
Trustee Scherschel.
Yes.
All right, I counted 4. The meeting stands adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, can you hear me?